Looking back now, like, what do you think your addiction was really a symptom of?
Fear, loneliness, jealousy, uh, inappropriate expectations, um, a, a feeling that I was never going to get what I need, let alone what I want. Um, I think you know what makes us pick up that first drink or drug is a lot different than what sustains our addiction before it becomes physical. I mean, you can become physically addicted to painkillers, physically addicted to opiates, physically addicted to, coke and hallucinogenics and weed and alcohol. But before that, before I even picked up, my first drink or drug, my real first drink or drug, um, I was behaving alcoholically, um, uh, extreme self-centeredness, thinking everything was mine, a hyper selfishness. When I was little, 5, 6, 7, 8, stealing from friends, parents, utility drawers in their kitchen, stupid stuff like kitchen shears. I, I my father and I would go surf casting and saltwater fishing from the beach during the summers. Um, and he and I never went fishing in 3 Mile Harbor, which was or in the bay, which was on the non-ocean side of our summer community. And I went to a store and stole a bag of 100 bobbers. I had no use for the bobbers. It wasn't something I wanted, wasn't something I needed, but yet I did it. I needed to scratch that itch. I needed to feel differently than how I was feeling. All sort of tent poles of, alcoholism and addiction.
And what role do you think, like, childhood kinda trauma played in your addiction story? I mean, I think your parents got divorced. I know your mother had a traumatic, I think, brain injury that I know you it was really hard on you. I know you and her had a really, really solid relationship. Like, talk about, like, your family dynamic and the role that that played in everything that you battled.
Well, I think if you are predisposed to alcoholism and addiction, right? And clearly I was because I was behaving alcoholically, right? Um, all the traumas that we go through as young people and even well into our adult years magnifies that. It amplifies it, right? Um, my parents did the best that they could. They didn't know what I think parents know now, which is, you know, uh, trauma, unaddressed can be transferred. You can actually give it to other people. Um, the power of carrying shame is massive. So, as a parent, I try to address that with my son, right? Uh, because I know things now that my parents didn't. Um, I think, quite honestly, that it was that amplification of my behaviors and the amplification of that feeling that nothing was going to solve my problem, that sort of overwhelming sense of hopelessness was what my traumas magnified. And nobody wants to feel that. I think the loneliness was something that I coped with better looking back on my childhood, uh, than a lot of the other issues that were popping up. But for sure, um, the parents divorcing, mother getting sick, all that kind of stuff, pressures of high school. Am I going to fit in? Am I going to get find love in my life. I mean, all the stuff that I watched, other teenagers grow up with as an adult, I realized I was not in a position to handle them for a whole variety of reasons. And so, therefore, if you don't want to feel something, if you don't have a solution for it, if you don't believe, and by the way, those solutions could be work harder for it, talk to another human being, two very, very, very simple things that provide solutions to people who have my set of problems. Um, I just pushed inward and said, I'll solve it myself. I know it all. I'm I'm smarter than everybody. I mean, just all these lies that your brain tells you, uh, in an effort to preserve the power of your illness. I mean, we joke around in recovery that, "Oh, that's your disease talking." It really is your disease talking. And so, my solution was a really excuse me, was a really easy one. I knew how I would feel if I drank and used drugs, and how it made me feel was, at first, phenomenal, but most importantly, it was a forgetting of reality. It was stepping away from the things that were scaring me the most. It was, an escape, and then it just starts to be a a roller coaster with no rolling, just a straight sort of sometimes slow, sometimes fast, uh, express train to the bottom.
What did that trajectory look like for you? I mean, I know you started dabbling with stuff when I think you were what, like in middle school or something, and then obviously like your story gets really, really gnarly. But talk about like the beginning and then how the things got worse, as the things
I
progressed.
tried smoking pot in summer camp. I knew what wine tasted like. I knew what my dad's scotch and soda tasted like. I knew what beer tasted like. Um, when my mother had her brain injury, the first thing that I did was go to the kitchen drawer where there was, a couple $100 in an envelope for emergencies. And I took, I think it was like $60 at the time, and went to Central Park, met with, my friend's drug dealer, whose name was Floyd. Uh, Floyd, had, could sell me an ounce of weed. He did. Um, and in those days, there was no, I mean, we all see pictures. I've been sober 33 years, but all of that green sticky bud wasn't around until I was in later years in high school, college. It just all of a sudden exploded on the scene, with the California, um, drug trade. In those days, it was brown dirt weed, or other kinds of smoke from Mexico. Um, and I got I'll never forget it. It was Acapulco Gold. I divided it up, on a kitchen scale, into quarters, sold 3/4 of it to my friends, and had a quarter ounce to myself, and, proceeded to smoke it up over the course of a couple of days, and I was off to the races. I mean, at that point, I had found finally, my brain told me, "Here is something that works. You can use it in the morning to get through your day. You can use it at night to forget what happened during the day. You can use it to remove yourself." And, then it was just a matter of seeing, well, what can these other things do? And what happens when I combine them? So by the time I left high school, I was a real New York City garbage head. Pills, hallucinogenics, cocaine, heroin, you know, weed. Booze was, something to do when you like went to a bar to drink with your friends once a week. And I really, there were side effects to drinking too much alcohol. Um I it wasn't the thing for me. Um, that changed in college. It became more of a thing. It changed in my late 20s when I kicked all hard drugs because that must be the problem, and I just exclusively started drinking. And when I exclusively started drinking, that train to the bottom accelerated tenfold. Alcohol, I think, is the most dangerous chemical that I know of.
Yeah. Yeah, it's crazy, like, how untalked about, like, the danger or under talked about, I should say, the dangers of alcohol is compared to, like, other substances, right? And, like, I think alcohol, destroys more things in people's lives if you're not careful than even things like heroin.
Yeah, I mean, the heroin is expense, access. I mean, it's not that you can't find it. It's just that I mean, I live here in Minnesota, right? Um, Other things are more readily available. And I know that because I sponsor people in my 12-step program and, younger people coming out of treatment centers or in my meetings and stuff like that. So anecdotally, you sort of stay up on what's around and what's available. Um, you know, eh, heroin addiction is awful, kills lots of people. Um, it is to me because alcohol is accessible everywhere, and exists everywhere from convenience. You don't even need to go to a liquor store anymore to get alcohol. Um, and because it creates um, so much personal chaos when you consume it, right? You become sloppy, you become I'm talking about the impairment, right? Um, it is vastly different, let's say, than marijuana. I will there's I'm friends with a lot of law enforcement people, and at one point I was doing ride-alongs with some of my SWAT team friends and police officer buddies who were on special cases because it was just I found it fun. And I remember the he has since retired, but he was the head of the St. Paul police force and the first um, black police chief to come from the streets as a beat cop to become chief of police. He's now security liaison for our governor. But I got a chance to talk to him when he was police chief. We were seated next together and each other at a fundraising dinner. And he said to me something that I've never forgotten. He said, when there's a, a problem and we bust through a door and there's marijuana involved, it's four people sitting around a frisbee. There's a bong on the table and they're watching reruns of your TV show. And he was generalizing and making a joke, but he was also being very serious. He said, when there when we bust through the door and there is um someone with a gun, when there is someone who's hurt their spouse, hurt a child, robbed a store, and he just went right down the list. He said 99% of the time there are always hard drugs involved, whether it's, meth, crack, uh pills, you name it. It always involves, to a certain degree, those sorts of things. Um, and he said the one chemical that he personally thought did more damage when you start to talk about car accidents and abuse and all the rest of that is alcohol because of the massive impairment. Um, it's an awful and insidious thing. I also heard a highly placed government official tell me once in Washington D.C. that if I invented alcohol today and put it in front of the USDA and the FDA and all the other clearing houses that would be necessary to sell the product, it would be classified as a unavailable substance in the same way that pharmaceutical heroin is.
Dang. Yeah, I mean, obviously, heroin is killing way more people, like, on the surface now because of fentanyl and stuff like that, but, yeah, I mean, what I was saying was kinda what you alluded to, like, alcohol, because of when you're impaired, like, it's, like, impact on marriages, drinking and driving, what it does to your liver, your overall health, your relationships, like,
To
all the
qu to quote every it's we're recording this and we're at the start of the NBA and NHL playoffs, and I can't tell you how many times over the weekend I heard the phrase, "Well, that doesn't show in the stats, but it's a very important piece of that player's game," or whatever. It doesn't necessarily show in the stats, but alcohol affects more people. I mean, grandpa dies of a heart attack at 65. Well, he was a heavy drinker. I mean, that could be an alcohol related death. But even the quantified deaths associated with alcohol and heroin have completely disparate numerical values. I mean, alcohol, you know, quantifiably, is more damaging to society, and yet we fetishize it and make that legal. Um, as a parent, it's a very, very interesting conundrum. What do you do? Do you, do you, do you encourage your kids to smoke weed? Do you encourage your kids to drink? What do you encourage them to do?
right. And I know for you, your story, like, you were, like, homeless, you were, like, ready to, like, end your life. I remember you
I
telling me.
tried.
Yeah,
I tried. I did. I mean, look, I have a very low bottom. Um, I, I eventually I drank and drugged myself out of every job, every friendship. My parents thought I was dead. I mean, you name it, just right down the line. Got evicted from the last apartment that I ever was renting. Um, I wound up going down to the shop and beer bar behind uh, the the train station in on the west side of New York City, Penn Station, and I, you know, talked to some of the guys there, and they said, "Oh, we live in a building down on Sullivan Street." And I spent the next 11 months sleeping on a pile of dirty clothes in a building that had no windows with pirated electricity and never washed myself. Um, I mean, horror story after horror story, stealing to make ends meet, very minimal ends, but I needed to buy booze, and I needed to get Comet Cleanser to sprinkle in a circle around the area where I slept so the rats and roaches wouldn't crawl on me in the middle of the night. Um, and eventually, I stole some money from one of my godparents and checked in to a hotel that no longer exists called the San Pedro, very fancy name for a very unfancy, uh, hotel, and, rooms were available by the hour. I plunked down a couple $100 and, went upstairs and swallowed a fistful of barbiturates and kept chugging vodka and woke up 2.5 days later. I mean, literally for that brief second. I mean, the brain operates in such an interesting way. We all have that moment where we sort of, wake up from a sleep or whatever, and for a second, you kind of a millisecond don't know where you are, but it's enough time for the brain to have a lot of thoughts in that millisecond. And I remember coming to, I had vomited, and thank God I was face down, I guess, um, based on the the dried, excreta on my face and the fact that I had lived. Um, and, oh my gosh, for a second there, I was just like, Is this heaven, hell?" I mean, I had that brief sort of like, "Where am I?" But, I had instant recall of why I went to the place to do what I did. And I plugged a phone back into the wall, and called a friend and said the words that I had literally never uttered my entire life, which was, Uh, I don't know what I'm doing. Can you help me?" And, that 3 days later, I was in treatment against my will, but I was in treatment.
What do you think it was about that situation for you that made you wanna change? Because I think a lot of times people, when they are in a situation like that, there's an immense amount of shame, guilt, failure, and they're like, "You know what? Like, I might as well just keep making my life worse."
Oh, I was well past that. I was into I mean, there's 2 stages of, alcoholism and addiction in my mind. There's, once you are an alcoholic or an addict, there's the phase where you deny it, and then there's the phase where you tell someone to go f themselves because you care, and I was at the "go f yourself, I don't care," phase for several years, but there was something about that last intervention, it was not my first, that I realized I I had nothing else. I always had an idea, even the idea to, like, steal jewelry, hock it, get money, buy pills and booze, kill myself. Like, that was a plan. Wasn't a good plan or a healthy plan, but it was a plan. My the sitting there at that intervention, actually walking in, knowing what it was, I knew it the minute I walked into the place, made me think, I don't have I don't have an option. And, I took the next available play, which was just to say, "What time is my plane?" And I flew out to Center City, Minnesota, one-way ticket, um, bag with 1 change of clothes in it that was given to me by people, um, and, started this journey, and that was January 28th, 1992.
Wow. Like, what a story, and I think that people who see you now, they're, like, shocked when they hear, this part of your journey, and if they're not familiar with it, and I'm curious, like, how did you go from what you just described to, like, bizarre foods? Like, what was the path like from early recovery to making it on TV?
I don't know, I was alert. Um, I kept doing the next right thing. I, wrote down, dreams and put dates by them so they became plans. Um, I mean, it was really just a matter of growing up and doing what I, was taught by people in the recovery rooms that I was attending meetings in. I mean, I just literally put one foot in front of the other. Um, I will say, some of it was circumstantial. I mean, if you said to someone today, "Oh, um, you wanna be on TV," first of all, they'll laugh at you because, it's you could probably be more successful on something that isn't called TV if you're into media. But, back then, there were no cell phones, there was no quote unquote "internet" the way we see it now. There wasn't I mean, there was nothing. Um and there was linear TV, and I wanted to be on linear TV telling stories about food. I mean, I've been a storyteller my whole life. That was the goal. I want to tell stories. I want to tell bigger stories. I want to tell bigger stories to a bigger audience. So that route was television, and back then, there was not the line of 10 million people trying to make food and travel shows on television. In fact, networks didn't even see the importance of food and travel shows. You had some food shows, early days of Food Network, where people were cooking. You had travel shows like Rick Steves, who would this episode of Ireland, and he's walking across, the cliffs of Moher, and, going into a pub and listening to a band, and uh, showing you the sights and the churches and the historical places and stuff like that. Um, so um, it was it was a really, really, really fascinating time. Uh, the gentleman who was running Travel Channel, knew something that no one else knew, and that was that he was negotiating to buy, a show that was failing on Food Network called A Chef's Tour, and A Chef's Tour was, Tony Bourdain's first show, and it was not doing well on Food Network. People were tuning in to see Emeril and Rachel Ray cook. They were not tuning in to see someone, uh, younger, brash, irreverent, going to Vietnam and eating. But Pat Young, who was running Travel Channel at the time, thought, well, that might work on my network. In fact, I think it will. And so he bought that show. They aired it for a year and then they renamed it No Reservations. Um, and he wanted to buy another show that could fit uh, before Bourdain's show on Monday nights. And so over the course of a year and a half of me just not taking no for an answer, um, we finally got permission to make a pilot. We finally made the pilot. It did well enough. And he thought, well, we can shape this show. It's good. It's not great. But, he saw something in me the same way he saw something in Tony and his show that was okay, but not great, but knowing that they could make it great. And we were on back to back on Monday nights on Travel Channel, starting in what 2000, early 2007, January of 2007, and that night just exploded.
That's amazing. I'm curious, like you said something about not taking no for an answer. And that reminds me of something that's come up recently over the last few years where people are talking about addiction being a superpower and that a lot of people who are former addicts become incredibly successful because, when you're an addict, it's like this religion and this, will to survive and you do whatever it takes to get your fix, right? And I've been there just like you. What are your thoughts on like addiction and as it relates to superpower and success?
We'll get you back to this episode in just 1 second, but first, I want to give a quick shout out to this episode's sponsor, Fresh Pressed Olive Oil Club. Like many of us, I'm eating healthier, and that's why I love good olive oil. And by good, I mean fresh. Olive oil packs the most flavor and healthiest nutrients when it's fresh from the farm. And that's the problem with supermarket olive oils. They're just not that fresh. They can sit on the shelf for many months and grow stale. That's why I get my olive oil direct from small, award-winning farms, thanks to my buddy, TJ Robinson, who's also known as the Olive Oil Hunter, who you may have heard recently on the podcast. When I tasted TJ's farm fresh oils, I fell in love with their vibrant, grassy flavors. They're incredibly delicious on things like salad, veggies, pasta, meat, fish, you name it. As an introduction to his Fresh Press Olive Oil Club, TJ is willing to send you a full-size $39 bottle of one of the world's finest olive oils, fresh from the new harvest, for just $1 to help him cover shipping. And there's no commitment to buy anything now or ever. Get your free $39 bottle for just $1 shipping and taste the difference freshness makes. Go to getfreshdoug.com. That's getfreshdoug.com for a free bottle and just pay $1 for shipping. That's getfreshdoug.com. Now back to the show.
Yeah, I mean, I use other words for it, but I think you're spot on. I mean, as an addict and alcoholic, I was incredibly stubborn to a fault. Uh, that has at times served me well. At times it is not, right? And I think when people say addiction is a superpower, I think it's a generalization we just have to be a little careful with. I agree in general with the sentiment. If you're an addict or alcoholic and you recover and you understand that some of your character defects can be useful at times, then using them at times becomes a superpower, right? I'll give you an example. I never went to business school. I never took a course in finance, but I had a lot of street smarts from selling drugs for a long time and surviving on the streets. And some of those skill sets, a great BS detector that I have, a knack for knowing what someone else wants and being able to supply an answer to that. Well, you know, on the negative side, a, a factor of codependence that is frightening if you are using it in personal relationships. You're bound to skewer yourself, right? Telling people what they want to hear. You're not being true to yourself, right? In a business meeting, when you've been sober 5+ years, right? And you actually have some idea of when to use that skill can be very, very valuable. Um, so I think we just have to be careful about how we boundary those behaviors. But yeah, I think in general, there are a lot of recovering people who will tell you the same thing, especially those in the entertainment business. But I think for those of us in the entertainment business, it's and I've spoken to a lot of folks about this. Um, we have some really great famous examples of people that were completely unemployable, career cratering. They sober up and they become the greatest stars of our times. Uh, you know, uh, uh, Bradley Cooper is one of them that I've had a chance to meet and talk to a little bit about this. I'm Samuel Jackson. I've had a chance to meet and talk to about this. A lot of musicians, right? Because all of a sudden you show up on time, you're focused, you're able to do your best work, you're not asking what you can take from the day, you're trying to figure out what you can give to it. I I think that some of the skills that we hone as addicts and alcoholics, when you marry them with the principles of right-sized living, then you have a superpower.
Yeah. And speaking of superpowers and fame, like how did surviving rock bottom like shape the way you now view and approach things like success, fame, and purpose?
Well, I stayed living in Minnesota, so, if I went to New York or LA, my addictive personality, I'd never stop working. I find it hard to stop working these days as it is. Um, but, you know, it's an interesting it's an interesting topic that I actually don't do a lot of thinking about. Um, I try to focus more on the my ability to contribute to my family, my community, and the people around me, uh, and kind of have blinders on like that, and not do anything that would have me hit the guardrails on either side of the highway. There's a lot of cliches in the recovering world. Stay in the middle of the boat, stay in the middle of the highway, don't hit the guardrails, stay in the middle of the herd, don't drift to the outside and get picked off by a lion, right? I mean, everything is about staying in the middle. It's all about being right sized with our peers, walking through life. Um, when I do that, I am one of many. What's weird then is when I, leave to go on a trip, right? I'm going, I've spent the last whatever week at home with my son, having a great time. My big worry today is what am I gonna make for dinner, right? Um, because I don't have a clue and I don't have anything to frost it. And what time am I getting home? Because my day is packed, right? I then leave on Wednesday to go attend the NFL draft, and I'm doing a big thing down at the NFL draft because of who I am as a, uh, you know, C-list cable TV guy. who managed to get himself also into a place, because I learned in my sobriety about the value of service work, who's gotten involved in so much service work that I'm now on the board of a NFL hunger relief charity, right? So I get to go down to the draft and I get to host a big gala raising money for hunger relief the night before the draft, and then attending, day one. And I am going to be in a very cool position doing a lot of really cool things when the draft starts. That's a whole lot of me, 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 and people want pictures, and they're shouting your name because I've been around long enough. Despite being a C-list cable guy, if you stay around long enough, everyone knows who that cable guy is, right? Um, and I think that's a tribute to my longevity in my career, which is solely due to the fans. Nothing I do. I'm just me on TV. But you have to go from a place of just worrying about walking the dog and feeding your kid to dealing with people screaming your name and screaming, I love you, right? You're the greatest. Um, and that is the very essence of the imposter syndrome. And that is a thing that is very real, that makes us very vulnerable to uh relapsing and a lot of other things that go along way before you pick up that first drink or drug if you're a sober person. Um, and so you have to learn how to handle that. I go to meetings. I have sponsees that call me. I still work the steps. I read the book. I do morning meditation. I do all the things I'm supposed to do, right? Take my medicine so that I can stay healthy, right? Because the danger of uh success is that your brain, your disease, starts telling you that that's what you need to prioritize as opposed to the things that got you there, right? And you know, one of the things that I find fascinating about sobriety, and I got sober in a 12-step program, so that's all I know is my own experience. But we get sober step one, step two, step three in order, right? We uh we get well physically, we get well mentally, and then we develop a relationship with something bigger than us. At the very least, in that third step, we acknowledge that there is something bigger than us, which was when I was using, or when I was 7 years old, by the way. I had no clue there was anything bigger than me. In fact, I would argue with you, there is nothing bigger than me, right? Self-determination and John Locke. And, when I got into high school and learned about different ways of thinking, the power of man became an obsession with me intellectually. So we get sober 1, 2, 3, but we also slide out of here 3, 2, 1. And the first thing that happens is we start to think we're all that in a bag of chips, which is why I bring up my work, right? Not so much when I'm with a TV crew on the road, but when I'm attending a public event, or when the ego is more present, right? And then you start to get into that misdirected thinking. You start to believe the things that your disease is telling you in your head, and then eventually you pick up. So we get well 1, 2, 3, but we get sick again 3, 2, 1, and I am convinced I don't have another recovery left in me. Um, I you know I I cling to the things that I do to stay well adjusted and healthy, um, with an incredible passion. I will say, I mentioned it once, but before you leave that subject,
Yeah.
the most important factor of my entire sobriety Not even close. Most important factor is that I fell in with a bunch of guys at when I first, first couple months clean, who were service work oriented. And I wound up at a meeting they went to as a newcomer. They literally took me that first night and went on a 12-step call, and they got me involved in service work, chairs, coffee, greeting, going down to the drunk tank on weekends and talking to people down there, um, and taking meetings to other places. And then when I was ready, sponsorship and all the other things that literally nothing has had a bigger impact on me than service work. Nothing keeps me more grounded than service work. Um, my sponsor told me long ago, you shouldn't go any place that you don't have a reason to be at,
Mm.
right? And so I have no reason to go to the NFL draft, except I'm not going there for the love, money, and applause, right? In fact, there is no money. There's a lot of love and applause, right? But I'm not being paid. I'm going because I'm helping to organize a big gala to raise money to fight childhood hunger in Wisconsin. The draft is in Green Bay. I have a reason to be there. If I don't have a reason to be there, I'm not going. Now, sometimes that reason is my son wants to go or a friend wants to go and I have access. That's different. But I have I have a reason to go. Um, and that reason is service work. Everything in my life revolves around service work in one way or another.
Speaking of hunger and service work and travel, I know you've spent time in third world countries. And I'm curious, like, is there any lessons you've learned from people in third world countries or conversations that you've had that have stuck out and that have shaped you?
Oh God, yes, every time. Um, and doesn't need to be third world countries. It can be second world or first world ones. I mean, travel is transformative. Um, when you're traveling, even in a first world country, you don't speak the language. You've not been there before. You have to ask questions. You have to ask for help. You get out of your ego, right? You get in. You're more curious when you're on the road. Like when I'm at home, I'm fat, dumb, and happy. You know, I laid on the couch last night and watched playoff basketball and hockey nonstop, toggling between two channels. Right now, that's me time. It's very important, right? To relax and just have me time. And I love playoff basketball and love playoff hockey, potentially even more. But I'm not learning anything, right? I'm indulging myself. And that there is a place and a time for that, right? When I when I'm on the road, I meet people like Jama the fisherman, uh, who I met in Madagascar, seemingly had the roughest, worst life of anyone I've ever well, one of the worst lives of anyone I've ever met, when you looked at him from the outside. He had, like, 8 kids at one point, 3 died. His house and the it was made of straw and sticks. It was a hut, you know, just big enough to sleep in for him and his wife, and kids slept in other little structures like that on the edge of this beach. Um, his boat was a fatter canoe with a stick and a piece of cloth that he would put his youngest child sitting in between the where the spar meets the sail so he could swing it out and it would catch more air, right? Um, the mast freely swung in a notch piece of wood. I mean, it was his house where they slept would blow down every 6 months in a storm. Um, he would catch a fish, keep the head and the tail for fish soup for his family, and he would take the rest and sell it in the market in this little town on the edge of nowhere, in a country that's at the edge of nowhere, where, by the way, there hasn't been a president in 35 or 40 years, right? It's lawless. Madagascar is a free for all. Um, and you know, like I said, he's had 3 kids die before him. They have no possessions. He was cutting bait with what had been a knife at one point and was now just like it was like the size of a stick of gum, and it was all rust, literally. And he was pinching it together and trying to cut pieces of bait for his hook. What he would do is he would go and he'd catch a small fish as he's sailing out miles offshore, very dangerous water. Cut a little piece of bait, catch a fish, use that little fish to catch a bigger fish, use that fish to catch a bigger fish. And by the fourth time, he would attract really big fish, like, you know, a 40, 50 pound uh, kingfish that he would then spear, right? One of the hardest things to do in a boat in the open. And when I say boat, I mean really an oversized canoe. Um, and that would be the fish that he would then take back. He had no refrigeration. Sometimes he would have salt in the boat if he was lucky. He could trade for it so that he could salt the fish down and stay out and maybe catch a second one, right? And that fish, he didn't get money for it. He traded clothes for clothes and other things for his wife and food so he could eat. Lived with no electricity, no visible signs of potable water, right? They had to collect it. And I asked him, I lived with him for 2 days, and at the end of the 2 days, I was with him, and he was looking out at the sky, and I asked him if he was happy. The translator I was with translated, and he looked at me, and he laughed at me, and he spread his arms out. I knew what he was saying, even though I didn't speak the language. He was a Sakalava tribes person, and he said, "I have everything. I have the love of my family. I'm with my family. I'm watching the sky. It's beautiful here. I have everything a man could want." And I just sat there and I was just like, "Oh my God." I mean, I that changed me.
Mhm.
It changed me. Uh, in Botswana, you know, hunting with tribes people there who made their own twine out of reeds to catch with little wooden snap snares to catch birds to eat. You want to be helpful when you're living with the tribe. If you're not helpful, you're pushed out to the edges and worthless if you can't help. So I immediately, when we went to get the birds, grabbed my knife and went to cut the twine, and they like freaked out and started yelling and screaming at me. And I explained to my translator that, you know, we have twine in our house too. It sits in a drawer in the kitchen. I use it once a year to take the Christmas tree home in the station wagon from the tree farm to the house. Uh, and the translation that I got back from the hunters that I was with was, we make that string and we reuse it until it turns to dust,
Mm.
and we make more string. And since that trip, I've been the most environmentally conscious son of a bitch you'll ever meet. You know, things that are truly, truly, truly life changing. You know, gratitude, purpose, faith, are all things that have been magnified for me by meeting and interacting with people from around the world.
Speaking of faith, purpose, adversity, having nothing, which you just described this incredibly inspiring story of these people that you've met, this guy that you met and how you interacted with them. What do you say to somebody that is still feels stuck in shame and thinks that they're way too far gone to change their life?
Uh, that there is another option, that that voice that's speaking to them is telling them a lie. I share with them intimate parts of my own story where I heard the same voice inside my head and believed it. And then what happened when I started to challenge that voice inside my head. Um, I encourage them to ask another person for help. I encourage them to start using things, sentences literally fill in the blank. I don't know how to do blank. Can you help me?
Yeah.
Human beings are designed to be helpful.
Right.
We want to be helpful to others. If a stranger on the street stopped you and said, I'm lost, um, and some people stole my car and hurt me, and I'm not sure where I am, uh, you would help that person immediately. If someone in front of you on a city street fell and broke their leg, you would be the first person. When I say you, I'm talking to everyone who's listening. You would not walk by that person with the broken leg who's in pain. If you were the nearest person to them on the street, in a store, wherever, you would help them. And so I encourage people to be honest and ask people for help on the problems they don't know how to solve themselves, because other people have solved that same problem. It's why one of the great things that we learn in, you know, our sobriety, is just to speak from our experience and not from our ideas or our opinions. So if someone asked me to solve a problem that I didn't know how, I would say to them, I'm going to help you. I don't know how to do that, but I'm going to ask a couple people and I think they might know, right? Getting out of that ego and realizing that maybe you're not the person to help, but maybe you can help them find someone to help is the very cornerstone of community.
Something I wanted to ask you is there's a stigma or like a generalization, I guess I should say, that the restaurant industry like fuels addiction. Um, why do you think that is?
I think the restaurant industry doesn't fuel addiction. Addicts and alcoholics find the restaurant industry and a couple of others easy to hide in.
Mm,
The I'll get back to that in a second. I went to keynote a national construction convention. They wanted me to talk about suicide and recovery. And I asked them on a pre-call, why me? And why that group? I was just curious. Uh, and they said, oh, uh, by percentage, our industry has more suicides than any other in America. I was stunned. And I asked more questions. They said, well, our members, these are people who repair roads 12 months a year. They do um, some of the worst labor in our country. And it's a job that we need so badly that, it, a lot of people who are just able-bodied get into that kind of construction, right? You don't have to be specialized. You don't have to have a carpenter's background or a plumber's background. You just need to have a strong back, right? The um the fact of the matter is that we have an epidemic on our hands of co-signing on misbehavior, right? So much false information on the internet. Um, so many people co-signing all kinds of different behaviors, selfish ones, gets a lot of people in trouble. A lot of them find that they can get a job in the restaurant industry. You can just hop in and wash dishes or peel potatoes or bus tables with absolutely no background whatsoever. And there's so much need for employees. You also have to remember that the restaurant industry is the number one employer of first-time job seekers, last-time job seekers, single moms, single dads, returning citizens, people coming out of jails and institutions, right? I could go on and on. It's a very special industry. A lot of those people have a lot of unresolved issues and a lot of chemical dependency and alcoholism, right? So we find it easier to hide there, and then it pops that number up. I think people have gotten in this habit of saying, "Oh, it's so stressful." It makes alcoholics and drug addicts. It's just as stressful and hard as a whole variety of other jobs. Go dig ditches all day long. Go build roofs 12 months a year in crazy weather. You know, I could list a dozen other industries like that. We don't talk about it in the same way. We point fingers at the restaurant industry. In fact, it's the restaurant industry's generosity and its open arms and its willingness to uh engage in real hospitality, which means giving people a chance, that skews that number, because we do have, by percentage, more people with mental health issues within our businesses than other industries.
Yeah. And I'm glad you brought that up because I disagree with that notion as well. Because I think people just want to point the finger and blame like the restaurants when in fact it's like, every job you have is stressful. Being an entrepreneur is stressful. Working in a hospital is stressful. Like you said, digging ditches is stressful. Like it's all stressful. It just comes down to the person who's involved and how are they managing their stuff. Last question I have for you is this: is what do you think the old version of you, the one that was lost in addiction, if he could see the person you are today, what do you think he would say?
I can't believe you're alive.
It's hard to believe, right? I mean, your story is so
I
inspiring.
mean, it's my when I look back on my story and at the times in my life that I've committed it to paper, it is a one-way ticket to an early death. And it was reckless and irresponsible in the extreme. So I think being shocked that I was alive would be probably the big one.
What's next for you?
Gosh, more TV. I've got a big book coming out in October. Very exciting stuff. It's a big year. It's a very, very rough economy. It's really tough. You talked about being an entrepreneur. My biggest challenges are keeping my businesses alive. Um, and that's hard. But we're gonna do our best.
Well, Andrew, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation, and I think my audience will as well.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it. And to all of my sober brothers and sisters out there, sending huge hugs. And if you're listening to this and you are in and out or think you have a problem, please remember, just pick up the phone, one person, and just ask them to help you. Just start by asking someone to help you.
It's the name of the game, right? That small step and just asking for help.